You know what they don't tell you about the desert? It remembers everything. Every drop of blood spilled on its sand, every body buried in its embrace, every secret whispered under its stars. I learned that the hard way in the summer of 2018, out in Presidio County, Texas. Population 7,000 souls, spread across 3,800 square miles of nothing but desert, mountains, and the kind of silence that makes you hear your own heartbeat. If you're watching this from Texas, drop a comment. What county you in? I bet you've got your own stories about things that shouldn't exist in the desert. Things that make you lock your doors at night, even when your nearest neighbor is 20 miles away. My name is Sheriff Jake Morrison. I served Presidio County for 31 years before what happened that summer. Before I learned that some borders aren't meant to be crossed, and some things that come out of the desert should be sent straight back to hell. Hit that subscribe button if you want to hear the whole truth. Not the official version, not what the newspapers printed. The truth about what really happened in Presidio County in 2018. The truth about why I can't look at the desert the same way anymore. June in West Texas is hell's waiting room. The temperature hits 115 degrees by noon. The air is so dry it cracks your lips just breathing, and the sun beats down like it's got a personal grudge against every living thing stupid enough to be outside. I'd been sheriff of Presidio County for 26 years by June 2018, and I thought I'd seen everything the desert could throw at me. Drug runners from Mexico, human trafficking, bodies dumped and mummified by the heat before anyone found them. The desert was cruel, but it was a cruelty I understood, or thought I did. It started with a call from Bobby Hernandez, a rancher who owned about 10,000 acres of scrubland 40 miles southeast of Marfa. Bobby was tough as leather, the kind of man who'd set his own broken bones and stitch his own wounds rather than drive the 2 hours to the nearest hospital. So when his voice shook over the radio that morning, I knew something was seriously wrong. "Sheriff, you need to get out here," he said, and I could hear the wind howling behind him, that constant West Texas wind that drove people crazy if they listened to it too long. "I found something. Something that ain't right." "What kind of something, Bobby?" I asked, already reaching for my hat and keys. In my experience, when ranchers said something wasn't right, it usually meant they'd found a body. Drug deals gone wrong, border crossings gone worse. The desert collected corpses like some people collected stamps. Sheriff, I can't explain it. You just need to see it. And Jake?" He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Bring everyone. Bring everyone you've got." The drive to Bobby's ranch took an hour and a half, following dirt roads that hadn't seen maintenance since the Bush administration. The first one. My deputy, Carlos Mendoza, rode shotgun, a good kid from El Paso who'd been with the department for 3 years. We didn't talk much during the drive. There's something about the desert that discourages conversation, like the vastness of it makes words seem pointless. Bobby was waiting for us at the entrance to his property, standing next to his beat-up F-150 with his rifle across his lap. That should have been my first warning. Bobby Hernandez didn't scare easy, but he was scared now. His weathered face was pale beneath the permanent sunburn, and his hands shook as he pointed toward the eastern edge of his property. "It's about 2 miles in," he said, not making eye contact. "Found it this morning, checking on the cattle. They won't go near it. Hell, I've never seen anything that could spook longhorns like that, but they won't get within 100 yards of the place." We followed Bobby's truck deeper into his property, the landscape becoming increasingly desolate. Out here, 40 miles from the nearest town, you could die of thirst 20 feet from a road and no one would find you for months. The only signs of life were the occasional scraggly mesquite tree and the turkey vultures circling overhead, waiting for something to die. Bobby stopped his truck at the base of a small rise, a hill of red rock and sand that looked like every other hill in West Texas. But there was something different about this one. The air felt wrong here, thicker somehow, like before a thunderstorm, but the sky was clear blue from horizon to horizon. And Bobby was right about the cattle. I could see them in the distance, clustered together on the far side of a gulch, all facing away from the hill. "It's just over the rise," Bobby said, but he didn't move to get out of his truck. "I ain't going back up there. Once was enough." Carlos and I exchanged glances. In all my years of law enforcement, I'd never seen a rancher afraid of his own land. These were people who dealt with rattlesnakes, mountain lions, and drug cartels without batting an eye. Whatever was over that rise had shaken Bobby to his core. We climbed the hill, our boots slipping in the loose sand, sweat already soaking through our uniforms despite it being barely 9 a.m. At the top, we stopped dead in our tracks. Below us, in a natural depression about 30 feet across, was something that shouldn't exist. The sand had been fused into glass, not in patches or streaks like you might see from a lightning strike, but in a perfect circle of smooth black glass that reflected the morning sun like a mirror. And in the center of that glass circle, arranged with deliberate precision, were 7 bodies. But calling them bodies doesn't really capture what we were looking at. They were mummified by the desert heat, skin turned to leather, pulled tight over bones. That part wasn't unusual. The desert did that to corpses. What was unusual was their positioning. They were arranged in a 7-pointed star, feet at the center, heads pointing outward, arms spread wide. Each body was dressed in what looked like ceremonial robes, though the fabric was so degraded by time and heat that it was hard to tell what they might have originally looked like. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was their faces. Each of the 7 corpses had their mouths open in what must have been screams, and their eye sockets. Their eye sockets had been filled with that same black glass that covered the ground, like someone had poured molten glass into their eyes while they were still alive. "Jesus Christ," Carlos whispered, crossing himself. He was Catholic, like most folks from El Paso, and I saw him fumbling for the rosary he kept in his pocket. I pulled out my phone to call it in, but there was no signal. There never was out here in the deep desert. We'd have to drive back toward the main road to get even one bar. But I took photos, dozens of them, documenting every angle of the scene. Something told me this was important, that we were looking at something more than just a particularly gruesome murder scene. As I circled the glass depression, taking pictures, I noticed something else. There were symbols carved into the glass, just barely visible unless the light hit them right. They weren't anything I recognized. Not English, not Spanish, not even the petroglyphs left by the indigenous peoples who'd lived here centuries ago. They were something else, something that hurt to look at for too long, like those optical illusions that make your brain struggle to process what you're seeing. "Sheriff," Carlos called out, and there was an urgency in his voice that made me look up from my photography. He was standing at the edge of the glass circle, staring at something on the ground. "You need to see this." I walked over to where he was standing and looked down. There, pressed into the sand just outside the glass circle, was a footprint. It was fresh, couldn't have been more than a few hours old based on how sharp the edges were. But it wasn't a human footprint. It was too long, with what looked like claw marks at the ends of the toes. And it was deep, much deeper than a footprint should be, like whatever made it weighed several hundred pounds. "Could be a mountain lion," I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew they weren't true. I'd seen plenty of mountain lion tracks, and this wasn't one of them. This was something else. We found more tracks leading away from the circle, heading northeast toward the mountains. They went on for about 50 yards before simply stopping, like whatever made them had vanished into thin air, or taken flight. That thought popped into my head unbidden, and I pushed it away. There were no flying creatures in West Texas that could make tracks like that. There were no creatures anywhere that could make tracks like that. "We need to get a team out here," I told Carlos. "Full forensics, the works, and we need to identify these bodies." We headed back down the hill to where Bobby was waiting, still in his truck with the engine running like he was ready to bolt at any moment. When he saw us coming, his face was full of questions he didn't want to ask. "Bobby, how long has that been there?" I asked. He shook his head. "I was through here just last week, checking the fence line. It wasn't there then. Whatever happened, it happened in the last 7 days." 7 bodies arranged in a circle that had been there less than a week but looked like they'd been mummifying in the desert for years. Glass that shouldn't exist. Footprints from something that couldn't exist. And a rancher who'd seen it all, now too scared to set foot on his own land. We drove back toward town until we got cell signal, and I called in every resource I had. The Texas Rangers, the FBI field office in El Paso, even a forensic anthropologist from the University of Texas. Within hours, Bobby's ranch was swarming with law enforcement and scientists, all trying to make sense of what we'd found. The forensic anthropologist, Dr. Sarah Chen from Austin, was the first to notice something that made the whole situation even stranger. She pulled me aside as the sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of red and gold. "Sheriff Morrison, I need to show you something," she said, leading me to a temporary workstation they'd set up. She had a laptop open, showing close-up photos of one of the corpses. "These bodies, based on the level of decomposition and mummification, they've been dead for at least 20 years, maybe 30. "That's impossible," I said. "Bobby was through here last week." "I know what you're telling me, and I know what the evidence is showing me," Dr. Chen replied, pulling up more images. "But look at this. The clothing fibers, the degree of tissue degradation, even the accumulation of sand in the body cavities. All of it indicates these bodies have been in the desert for decades. And there's something else." She switched to a different set of images, close-ups of the symbols carved into the glass. "I've sent these to colleagues who specialize in ancient languages and symbols. No one recognizes them, but they all agree on one thing. The precision of these carvings is incredible. To carve into glass like this, especially glass that appears to have been formed at extremely high temperatures, would require specialized tools, laser cutters, maybe. But what? But the weathering patterns on the carvings suggest they're as old as the bodies. Decades old. Sheriff, we're looking at something that shouldn't be possible. Bodies that are decades old appearing in the last week, arranged on glass that shouldn't exist, with carvings made by technology that either doesn't exist or didn't exist when these carvings were made." As she spoke, one of the FBI agents called out from the site. They'd found something else. We hurried over to where a team was carefully excavating around the edge of the glass circle. They'd uncovered what looked like a metal box about the size of a shoebox, buried just beneath the sand. It was made of some kind of metal I didn't recognize, dark and somehow oily looking, with more of those symbols etched into its surface. "Don't touch it," I said, some instinct making me step between the box and the eager FBI agents. "Not directly. Use gloves, tongs, whatever, but don't touch it with your bare skin." They looked at me strangely, but something in my voice must have convinced them. They used tools to carefully extract the box and place it in an evidence container. As they did, I could have sworn I heard something, a whisper maybe, or the sound of sand shifting. But when I looked around, everyone was focused on the box, and the desert was still. That night, we set up a perimeter around the site. I stationed deputies in shifts, making sure someone was always watching. I told myself it was to preserve the crime scene. But the truth was, I didn't want to leave those bodies alone in the dark. Something about the whole situation felt wrong, felt dangerous in a way I couldn't articulate. I was right to be worried. At 3:17 a.m., Deputy Martinez, who'd drawn the midnight shift, called in a panic. His voice over the radio was high and scared, nothing like the steady professional I'd known for 10 years. "Sheriff, something's happening out here," The bodies. The bodies are... The transmission cut to static. I was already in my truck, racing through the desert night toward Bobby's ranch, Carlos right behind me in his patrol car. We made the hour-and-a-half drive in less than an hour, taking the dirt roads at speeds that should have flipped our vehicles. But something told me speed was essential, that every second counted. When we arrived at the site, Deputy Martinez's patrol car was there, lights still flashing, driver door open. But Martinez was nowhere to be seen. We called out for him, searched the area around the glass circle, but found nothing. No sign of struggle, no blood, nothing. Just his abandoned vehicle and the 7 bodies, still arranged in their star pattern. Except now there were 8. In the center of the star, where the feet of the 7 bodies pointed, was Deputy Martinez. He was arranged in the same position as the others, arms spread wide, mouth open in a silent scream. But unlike the others, he wasn't mummified. He was fresh, recently dead, maybe only an hour or 2 based on the body temperature. His eyes had been removed and replaced with that same black glass, still warm to the touch. But that was impossible. The medical examiner would later confirm that the glass in Martinez's eye sockets was chemically identical to the glass circle, formed at temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. To do that to someone would have required equipment, time, and would have left evidence everywhere. But there was nothing. No signs of anyone else having been there, no equipment, no struggle. Just Martinez, transformed into the 8th point of a star that shouldn't exist. The death of Deputy Martinez changed everything. This wasn't just some bizarre archaeological discovery anymore. It was an active crime scene with one of my own people dead. By dawn, the FBI had taken over the investigation, setting up a mobile command center that looked like something out of a movie. Black SUVs, satellite dishes, generators humming in the desert heat. They brought in specialists from all over the country, forensic experts, anthropologists, even some professors from universities I'd never heard of who specialized in what they called anomalous phenomena. The agent in charge was a woman named Special Agent Diana Foster, out of the Dallas field office. She was maybe 40, with that kind of tired efficiency that comes from seeing too much weird shit in too many places. When she looked at the glass circle with its 8 bodies, she didn't seem surprised so much as resigned, like she'd been expecting something like this to happen eventually. "Sheriff Morrison," she said, pulling me aside while her team worked. "I need to ask you some questions about this area. Has anything like this ever happened before? Any unexplained deaths, missing persons, strange phenomena?" I thought about it. Really thought about it. Presidio County had always been a strange place. You can't have 3,800 square miles of desert on the Mexican border without accumulating some weirdness. But nothing like this. Nothing even close. "We get the usual border stuff," I told her. "Drug runners, coyotes moving people across, occasional cartel violence. But this? No, ma'am, nothing like this." She nodded, making notes on a tablet. "What about local legends, stories the old-timers tell?" That gave me pause. There were stories, of course. There were always stories in places like this, where the desert had been swallowing secrets for thousands of years. The Apache had considered certain parts of the county forbidden land. The Spanish conquistadors had written about lights in the sky and voices in the wind. Even the early Texas settlers had stories about things that came out of the desert on certain nights, things that weren't quite human and weren't quite animal. "There are always stories," I admitted. "But they're just that, stories. Campfire tales to scare tourists." Agent Foster looked at me with eyes that had seen too much. "In my experience, Sheriff, the stories are never just stories. They're warnings that we've forgotten how to read." While the FBI processed the scene, I went to see Martinez's widow. Elena Martinez was a strong woman who'd known what she was signing up for when she married a cop, but nothing could have prepared her for this. I sat in her living room, trying to explain how her husband had died, and realized I couldn't. How do you tell someone that their loved one was killed by something that shouldn't exist, turned into part of a pattern that made no sense? "He called me," Elena said quietly, holding their youngest daughter on her lap. "At around 2 a.m. Said he was scared, that something was wrong at the site. I told him to leave, to come home, but he said he couldn't. Said he had a job to do." She looked at me with eyes full of tears and anger. "What happened to him, Jake? What really happened?" I couldn't lie to her, but I couldn't tell her the truth either. So I did what cops always do in situations like this. I made promises. I promised we'd find who did this. I promised they'd pay. I promised justice. But even as the words left my mouth, I knew they were hollow. How do you get justice against something that can turn sand to glass and appeared to exist outside the normal rules of reality? That night, unable to sleep, I drove back out to the site. The FBI had it lit up like a football stadium with portable floodlights, and agents in hazmat suits were carefully documenting every inch of the glass circle. But I wasn't interested in what was happening inside the perimeter. I was interested in what was happening outside it. I parked my truck a half-mile away and walked into the desert with just a flashlight and my service weapon. The moon was new, leaving the sky black except for the stars, more stars than you could ever see in a city, so many that they cast their own faint light on the desert floor. I walked in expanding circles around the site, looking for... I didn't know what I was looking for. Anything that didn't belong. I found it 300 yards from the glass circle, hidden in a shallow ravine. More footprints, the same impossible claw-marked prints we'd found before. But this time, they led somewhere. They led to a cave entrance I'd never seen before, which should have been impossible. I'd been sheriff for 26 years, had covered every inch of this county at one time or another. This cave wasn't on any map, wasn't in any survey. It was like it had just appeared. The entrance was narrow, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through, and it descended at a steep angle into the earth. The air coming out of it was wrong, too cold for the desert night, and it smelled like copper and ozone, like the air before a lightning strike. Every instinct I had told me not to go in there, but I thought about Martinez, about the promise I'd made to his widow, and I squeezed through the entrance. The cave opened up after about 20 feet into a larger chamber. My flashlight beam revealed walls covered in those same symbols from the glass circle, but these were older, much older. They weren't carved so much as melted into the rock, like someone had written them with acid or intense heat. And there were pictographs, too, crude drawings that seemed to tell a story. The drawings showed figures, human figures, gathered in a circle. Above them was something else, something that hurt to look at even in crude pictograph form. It had too many angles, too many dimensions, like someone had tried to draw a three-dimensional object in 2 dimensions and failed. The human figures were offering something to this thing. Other humans, it looked like, smaller figures being lifted up toward the impossible shape. Further into the cave, I found more recent evidence of activity. Candles, hundreds of them, all melted down to nothing but puddles of wax. Bones that looked disturbingly human arranged in patterns on the floor, and books, modern books, journals filled with handwriting in English and Spanish and something else, something that used letters I didn't recognize. I picked up one of the journals, shining my flashlight on its pages. The handwriting was neat, precise, like whoever wrote it was trying very hard to get every detail exactly right. It was dated starting in 1987, 31 years ago. The entries talked about preparing the way, and thinning the boundaries, and the 7 who would open the door. There were diagrams of the glass circle, drawn years before it appeared. There were lists of names, some crossed out, some circled. Deputy Martinez's name was on one of the lists, circled in red ink. My blood went cold. This had been planned. Someone had been planning this for decades, maybe longer. The 7 bodies, Martinez's death, all of it was part of something bigger, something deliberate. I photographed as many pages as I could, my hands shaking as I turned them. The later entries became increasingly frantic, talking about the alignment approaching and the door weakening and soon, 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 written over and over again. The last entry was dated June 3rd, 2018, just 5 days ago. It said simply, "Tonight we begin. The 7 are ready. The 8th will come. The 9th will complete the pattern. And then, at last, it will be free." The 9th. There was going to be a 9th. I grabbed as many of the journals as I could carry and started to leave. But as I turned toward the cave entrance, I heard something, footsteps, coming from deeper in the cave. Not the careful steps of a person trying to be quiet, but something else, something heavier with that same wrong rhythm I'd noticed in the prints outside. Not quite human, not quite animal. I drew my weapon and pointed my flashlight toward the sound. The beam penetrated maybe 30 feet into the darkness before being swallowed up. The footsteps got closer, and with them came a smell. That same copper and ozone scent, but stronger now, mixed with something organic and rotting. "Sheriff Morrison." The voice came from the darkness, but it wasn't quite a voice. It was like multiple people speaking in unison, their words slightly out of sync. "You shouldn't be here." "Who are you?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. "Show yourself." What emerged from the darkness shouldn't have been possible. It was Martinez, but it wasn't. His body moved wrong, like someone was puppeting it without quite understanding how human bodies were supposed to work. His eyes were still that black glass, but they somehow seemed to be looking at me. And when he smiled, his mouth opened too wide, showing too many teeth. "We are the servants," the thing wearing Martinez's body said. "We prepare the way. The door is opening, Sheriff. The 9th will complete the pattern, and then the old one will return. It has been sleeping beneath the desert for so long, waiting for the stars to align, waiting for the proper offerings." "Martinez?" I said, knowing it was foolish but unable to help myself. "Is that you in there?" The thing laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Martinez is with us now, part of the pattern, part of the door. Soon you will join him. Soon everyone will join him." It moved toward me with that horrible puppet-like gait, and I did the only thing I could think of. I shot it. 6 rounds, center mass, the sound deafening in the cave. The bullets hit. I saw them hit, saw the impact push the thing back. But no blood came out. Instead, there was a spray of that black glass, liquid at first, but hardening instantly into sharp fragments that embedded themselves in the cave walls. The thing looked down at the holes in its chest, then back at me. "You cannot stop this, Sheriff. It has been written in the stars for millennia. The old ones will return, and your world will be remade in their image." It took another step toward me, and I ran. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I ran like hell, squeezing through that cave entrance so fast I tore my uniform and scraped the skin off my arms. Behind me, I could hear that thing laughing, or maybe crying, or maybe both. The sound followed me out into the desert night. I made it back to my truck and immediately called Agent Foster. Within an hour, the cave was swarming with FBI agents in tactical gear. But when they entered, they found nothing. No journals, no bones, no candles. Even the pictographs were gone, the walls smooth and unmarked. The only evidence that I hadn't imagined the whole thing was the video I'd taken on my phone, and even that was corrupted, showing mostly static with occasional glimpses of symbols and text. Agent Foster believed me, though. I could see it in her eyes. She'd seen enough impossible things to know that sometimes the impossible was just another word for "we don't understand it yet." "We need to figure out who the 9th victim is going to be," she said, pacing the command center.
If there's really a pattern here, if someone's been planning this for decades, then they've already chosen the ninth. We need to find them before... She was interrupted by a call from the coroner's office in Alpine, the county seat. They'd been examining Martinez's body, trying to understand the glass in his eye sockets, when something had happened. The body was gone. Not stolen. Gone. The medical examiner had stepped out for coffee, and when he came back 5 minutes later, the examination table was empty. No sign of forced entry, nothing on the security cameras. Martinez's body had simply vanished. But he'd left something behind. Carved into the metal examination table, still hot to the touch like they'd been burned in, were words, "The ninth is chosen. The pattern will be complete. 3 days." 3 days. We had 3 days to figure out who the ninth victim would be and stop this. 3 days to prevent something that had been planned for over 30 years. 3 days to stop what the Martinez thing had called the Old One from returning. I looked at the map of Presidio County spread out on the table, at the photos of the glass circle with its 8 bodies, at the corrupted video from the cave that shouldn't have existed. Somewhere in all of this was a pattern, a logic that would tell us who was next. We just had to find it before it was too late. "Sheriff?" one of the FBI analysts called out, staring at his computer screen with the expression of disbelief. "You need to see this. I've been running the names from those journal photos through our databases. The 7 original bodies. We've identified them." He pulled up 7 missing persons reports on his screen. 7 people who had disappeared from various parts of Texas over the last 40 years. Different ages, different backgrounds, different cities. But they all had one thing in common. They all disappeared on June 21st, the analyst said. Different years, but always June 21st, the summer solstice. I looked at the calendar on the wall. Today was June 9th. The summer solstice was in 12 days, but the message had said 3 days. 3 days from now would be June 12th. "What's significant about June 12th?" Agent Foster asked, voicing my thoughts. I thought about it, running through everything I knew about the county, about the desert, about the history of this place. And then it hit me. June 12th, 1887. The date of the Presidio County massacre, when a group of settlers had been found dead in the desert, their bodies arranged in a pattern that was never fully explained. The Army had blamed it on Apache raiders, but the Apache had always denied it, said it was something else, something older that lived in the desert. 131 years ago, and now it was happening again. The command center became a war room. Agent Foster had called in resources from across the Southwest. Profilers, historians, even a few people she euphemistically referred to as consultants who looked like they'd stepped out of a Gothic novel rather than a federal agency. One of them, a Professor Blackwood from some university in New England, spent hours poring over the corrupted video from the cave, muttering to himself in languages I didn't recognize. We had 3 problems to solve. Who was the 9th victim going to be? Where would they be taken? And most importantly, who was behind all of this? The answer to the first question came from an unexpected source. Carlos, my deputy, had been going through social media posts from the area looking for anything unusual. What he found made my blood run cold. A woman named Rebecca Thorne, a real estate developer from Houston who'd been buying up land in Presidio County, had posted a series of increasingly strange messages over the last week. "The desert calls to me," one post read. "I can hear it singing at night, telling me secrets about what's buried beneath the sand." Another posted just yesterday. "They've shown me the truth. The old world is ending. A new one is beginning. I am honored to be chosen." I knew Rebecca Thorne. She'd been in my office 6 months ago asking about purchasing some county land near the Mexican border. Said she wanted to build a spiritual retreat center, a place for people to reconnect with the ancient energies of the desert. I thought she was just another New Age entrepreneur looking to capitalize on the mystique of West Texas. Now I realized she'd been scouting locations for something much darker. "We need to find her," Agent Foster said, already coordinating with state police to put out a BOLO alert. "If she's the 9th victim, she might go willingly. These posts suggest she's part of whatever cult is behind this." But Rebecca Thorne had vanished. Her hotel room in Marfa was empty, her rental car abandoned at a rest stop 30 miles from the glass circle. She'd left her phone behind, but the last GPS ping showed her heading into the deep desert, into an area called Devil's Backbone, a ridge of black rock that ran for 20 miles through the most inhospitable part of the county. We organized search teams, but I knew it was probably futile. The desert was too big, too empty. If someone wanted to disappear out there, really wanted to, we'd never find them. Not in 3 days, not in 3 years. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the cave, about the thing wearing Martinez's face, about the promise that the old one would return. At 3 a.m., I gave up on sleep and drove out to the one person in the county who might have answers, Maria Espinoza, whose family had lived in Presidio County since before it was part of Texas, since before it was part of Mexico, since before the Spanish came. Maria was 93 years old and lived alone in an adobe house her great-grandfather had built. She was awake when I arrived, sitting on her porch in the dark, as if she'd been expecting me. "Sheriff Morrison," she said in Spanish, though she spoke perfect English when she wanted to. "You've come about the old one." It wasn't a question. I sat down next to her, accepting the cup of coffee she offered that seemed to materialize from nowhere. "You know what's happening," I said. She nodded slowly. "My family has known for generations. We were here when it last woke, in 1887. My great-grandmother saw it happen, saw what came out of the earth when the barrier was thin. She made us promise to remember, to warn others when the signs appeared again." "Why didn't you warn us?" Maria laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Would you have believed me, Sheriff? Would anyone? No, people have to see for themselves. They have to learn the hard way that there are things older than humanity, things that were here before us and will be here after us." "What is it? This old one?" She was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the desert. "The Apache called it the hunger that walks. The Spanish called it El Devorador. My people. We just called it the thing that should not be. It's been sleeping beneath the desert for thousands of years, maybe longer. Every so often, when the stars align just right, the barrier between its world and ours grows thin. That's when it needs feeding. That's when it needs servants to prepare the way." "The cult?" "Not a cult, not exactly. People who've been touched by its dreams, infected by its thoughts. It calls to certain minds, particularly those who are already broken in some way. It promises them power, transformation, escape from the pain of being human. All they have to do is help it return." "How do we stop it?" Maria looked at me with ancient eyes. "You don't stop something like that, Sheriff. You can only delay it. Send it back to sleep for another century or two. But the cost..." She shook her head. "The cost is always blood." I left Maria's house as the sun was rising, her warnings echoing in my mind. According to her, the ritual needed 9 deaths. But not just any deaths. They had to be willing sacrifices, people who chose to give themselves to the old one. The first 7 had been cultists who'd spent years preparing themselves. Martinez had been converted after death, his body made into a vessel. And Rebecca Thorne, if she was indeed the 9th, had been groomed for months, maybe years. But there was a way to disrupt it. If the 9th sacrifice wasn't completed by the solstice, if the pattern was broken, the old one would return to its slumber. We just had to keep Rebecca Thorne alive for 3 more days. When I got back to the command center, there had been a development. Professor Blackwood had decoded part of the corrupted video from the cave. It showed coordinates, GPS coordinates for a location in Devil's Backbone. Agent Foster was already mobilizing a tactical team. "We go in hard and fast," she said, checking her sidearm. "If this is where they're holding the ritual, we might be walking into a hostile situation." I insisted on going with them. This was my county, my responsibility. Besides, I was the only one who'd actually seen what we were up against, who'd looked into the glass eyes of that thing wearing Martinez's face. The convoy headed out at noon. 3 SUVs full of FBI agents, a state police helicopter providing aerial support, and me in my sheriff's truck, feeling very out of my league. The coordinates led us deep into Devil's Backbone, to a place where the black rock formed a natural amphitheater hidden from view unless you were right on top of it. We approached on foot, weapons drawn, moving through the rocks like we were in hostile territory. Which, I suppose, we were. The helicopter reported heat signatures in the amphitheater, at least a dozen people, maybe more. What we found when we crested the ridge defied explanation. The amphitheater had been transformed. The black rock had been carved with thousands of those symbols, covering every surface. In the center was another glass circle, smaller than the one on Bobby's ranch, but glowing with an internal light that hurt to look at. Around it stood 13 figures in red robes, their faces hidden by hoods. And in the very center, lying on what looked like an altar made of fused glass and bone, was Rebecca Thorne. She was alive, conscious, and smiling. When she saw us, she laughed. "You're too late," she called out, her voice carrying clearly across the amphitheater. "Can't you feel it? It's already waking up. The door is opening." The ground began to shake, not like an earthquake, but like something massive was moving beneath us. The symbols on the rocks started to glow with that same painful light, and the air became thick, hard to breathe. Several of the FBI agents collapsed, blood running from their noses. "Take them down!" Agent Foster shouted, and we opened fire. But the bullets didn't reach their targets. They slowed, stopped, hung in the air like they'd hit an invisible wall. Then they melted, turning into drops of molten metal that fell to the ground and immediately cooled into strange, twisted shapes. The robed figures began to chant in that language I didn't recognize, their voices harmonizing in ways that human voices shouldn't be able to. The glass circle grew brighter, and something began to emerge from it. Not coming up from below, but coming through, like the glass was a window to somewhere else. I saw it clearly for just a moment before my mind refused to process what I was seeing. It was massive, but its size kept changing, like it existed in more than 3 dimensions, and we were only seeing a cross-section of it. It had what might have been eyes, or might have been mouths, or might have been something else entirely. It was old, older than anything should be, and it was hungry. "The 9th sacrifice," Professor Blackwood screamed from behind me. "If she dies willingly, it can fully manifest. Stop her!" But Rebecca Thorne was already moving. She'd produced a knife from somewhere, an obsidian blade that looked ancient. She raised it above her chest, ready to plunge it into her own heart. I didn't think. I just moved. I ran down into the amphitheater, ignoring the shouts behind me, ignoring the thing that was trying to push through from wherever it came from. The invisible barrier that had stopped our bullets didn't stop me, maybe because I wasn't trying to attack, just to save. I tackled Rebecca off the altar just as she brought the knife down, the blade missing her chest by inches. We hit the ground hard, and I felt the glass beneath us crack. Rebecca fought me, stronger than she should have been, her eyes wild with religious fervor. "You don't understand!" she screamed. "It's beautiful! It's going to remake everything! No more pain, no more death, just transformation into something greater!" "That thing doesn't care about you," I said, struggling to keep the knife away from both of us. "You're just food to it, just a way to open the door." The ground shook again, more violently this time. Cracks appeared in the glass circle, spreading outward like a spider web. The thing that was trying to come through roared, a sound that wasn't heard so much as felt, vibrating through every bone in my body. The robed figures chanting became frantic, desperate. And then Agent Foster did something I didn't expect. She didn't shoot at the cultists or the creature. She shot the glass circle itself, emptying her entire magazine into the spreading cracks. Other agents followed suit, and the circle began to shatter. The thing trying to come through screamed again, and this time I heard rage in it, and maybe fear. The portal or doorway or whatever the glass circle was began to collapse, pulling back into itself. The cultists tried to hold it open, pouring their will into maintaining the connection, but it was too late. The pattern had been broken. The 9th sacrifice hadn't been completed. The creature retreated, pulled back to wherever it came from, but not before I got one last clear look at it. In that moment, I understood what Maria Espinosa had meant. This wasn't something you could kill or arrest or even really fight. It was like trying to fight gravity or entropy. It simply was, and would always be, waiting in the spaces between reality for another chance to break through. The glass circle imploded with a sound like the world breaking. The force of it knocked everyone to the ground, and when I looked up, the amphitheater was just black rock again. No symbols, no glass, no portal to places that shouldn't exist. The cultists were unconscious or dead, their robes just normal fabric now, their power broken. Rebecca Thorne was sobbing in my arms, the fervor gone from her eyes, replaced by horror at what she'd almost done. "Oh God," she kept saying. "Oh God, I could see it. I could see what it really was. How could I have thought? How could I have wanted?" We arrested the surviving cultists, though most of them seemed to have had their minds broken by the experience. They babbled about transformations and ancient promises, but none of it made coherent sense. Rebecca Thorne was hospitalized, catatonic by the time we got her to Alpine. She never spoke again, as far as I know. The FBI cleaned up the site, classified everything at a level so high I wasn't even supposed to know it existed. Agent Foster pulled me aside before she left. "This never happened," she said simply. "There was a drug cult in the desert. They killed 8 people in a ritualistic manner. We stopped them before they could kill a 9th. That's the official story." "And the glass? The bodies aging decades in days? Martinez walking around after he died? Mass hallucinations caused by psychotropic drugs the cult was using? The bodies were old murders they'd dug up and arranged. Martinez's body was stolen by cult members and destroyed. That's bullshit, and you know it." She gave me a tired smile. "Yes, it is. But it's bullshit people can live with. The truth? The truth would break most people. They need to believe the world makes sense, that there are rules, that monsters don't exist. Let them have that comfort, Sheriff. God knows it's the only protection most of them have." The official investigation wrapped up within a week. The media got their story about a drug cult in the desert, complete with staged photos of seized narcotics and weapons that had nothing to do with what really happened. The FBI removed all evidence of the glass circles, the symbols, anything that might suggest something beyond a conventional crime. Bobby Hernandez got his land back, but he sold it within a month and moved to Nebraska. Said he couldn't stand the sight of the desert anymore. But the desert doesn't forget, and neither do I. I tried to go back to normal, to be the sheriff of a quiet county where the biggest problems were drunk drivers and cattle theft. For a few weeks I almost managed it. Then the dreams started. Every night I was back in that amphitheater, but in the dreams, we were too late. Rebecca Thorne completed her sacrifice, and the old one pushed through into our world. I watched it remake reality, transforming the desert into something alien,
something that operated on different physical laws. People were turned inside out, but kept living. Buildings grew like organic things, and the sky bled colors that don't have names. I'd wake up screaming, my sheets soaked with sweat, the taste of copper and ozone in my mouth. Carlos noticed first. "Sheriff, you okay?" he asked one morning, finding me asleep at my desk for the third time that week. "You look like hell." "Just haven't been sleeping well," I told him. But we both knew it was more than that. The department had lost Martinez, had been at the center of something that shook everyone who'd been involved. The official story might have been about a drug cult, but every deputy who'd been out there knew better. They'd seen the glass, seen the bodies, felt the wrongness in the air. We all carried that knowledge now, that burden of knowing the world wasn't what we thought it was. 3 weeks after the incident, I got a call from Maria Espinoza. "Sheriff," she said without preamble, "you need to come see me. Bring no one." I found her in her garden, tending to plants that grew despite the desert heat, despite the lack of water. She looked older than when I'd last seen her, as if the events of the past month had aged her years. "It's not over," she said, not looking up from her tomatoes. "You know that, don't you?" I did know. I could feel it in my bones, in the way the desert felt different now, charged with a potential that hadn't been there before. The portal closed. The ritual failed. "The door closed," she corrected. "But closing a door doesn't make the room on the other side disappear. The old one is still there, still waiting. And now it knows about you." "What do you mean?" She finally looked at me, and her eyes were full of pity. "You touched it, Sheriff. When you tackled Rebecca Thorne, when you disrupted the ritual, you made contact with something from outside our reality. It marked you. Can't you feel it?" I could. There was something different about me since that day, something I'd been trying to ignore. I saw things in my peripheral vision that vanished when I looked directly at them. I heard whispers in languages that predated human speech, and sometimes, just sometimes, I could feel the desert breathing, like it was alive and aware. "What does it want with me?" "You're an anchor now," Maria said. "A connection between its world and ours. It will use that connection to influence things, to prepare for its next attempt. Maybe not for another century, maybe sooner. Time doesn't mean the same thing to creatures like that." "How do I break the connection?" She shook her head slowly. "You don't. You carry it until you die, and you hope you die before it decides to use you." I left Maria's house feeling like I'd been sentenced to death, just with an indefinite execution date. But she'd given me something else too. A leather journal, old and worn, filled with handwritten notes in Spanish. "My great-grandmother's," she explained. "Everything she learned about the old one, about how to recognize its influence, how to resist it. You'll need it." Over the next few months, I studied that journal like my life depended on it, which I suppose it did. I learned about the signs that preceded an awakening, unusual weather patterns, animals behaving strangely, people having shared dreams about impossible geometries. I learned about the ways the Old One recruited servants, through dreams, through visions, through promises of transcendence that were really just elaborate ways to be consumed. And I learned about others like me. Throughout history, there had been people who'd disrupted the Old One's attempts to manifest, who'd been marked by it and lived to tell the tale. Most went insane. Some killed themselves rather than risk being used as conduits. But a few, a precious few, had found ways to use the connection against the creature, to serve as early warning systems and defenders against its influence. By December 2018, 6 months after the incident, I'd accepted my new reality. I was still sheriff, still did my job, but now I had an additional responsibility. I monitored the desert for signs of the Old One's influence. I investigated any reports of strange dreams or visions. I kept tabs on anyone who showed too much interest in the events of that summer. That's how I found them. The others. It started with an email from an address I didn't recognize. Just 2 words. You're marked. I thought about deleting it, but something made me respond. Who is this? The reply came within minutes. Someone like you. Someone who stood against it and lived. There are more of us than you think. Over the following weeks, I was inducted into a shadow network of people from around the world who'd encountered things like the old one. Former FBI agents who'd seen too much, professors who'd dug too deep into ancient texts, soldiers who'd found things in caves in Afghanistan that shouldn't exist, ordinary people who'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time and survived encounters with beings from outside our reality. We shared information, warned each other about emerging threats, and tried to prepare for the next time. Because there would always be a next time. The old ones, and there were more than one, I learned, were patient. They had been trying to break into our world since before humans walked upright, and they would keep trying long after we were extinct. Agent Foster was part of the network, though she never acknowledged it officially. She sent me updates on cult activity around the country, patterns that might indicate another attempt at manifestation. The cultists we'd arrested were all institutionalized now, their minds too broken to stand trial. But there were always more cultists, more people desperate enough or damaged enough to listen to the whispers from beyond. February 2019. A rancher found another glass circle, this one in New Mexico. Smaller than ours, only 3 bodies, and the ritual had apparently failed on its own. But it was starting again. April 2019. A group of college students in Arizona reported shared nightmares about something massive moving beneath the desert. 2 of them dropped out and disappeared. Their bodies were never found. July 2019. The 1-year anniversary of the Presidio County incident. I spent the night at the site where the glass circle had been, now just an unremarkable patch of desert. But I could feel it there. The thinness in reality, like scar tissue that never quite healed right. At exactly 3:17 a.m., the time Martinez had died, I heard his voice on the wind. "Sheriff," it said, and it sounded like him, really sounded like the man I'd worked with for 10 years. "I can see everything now. Past, present, future. It's all happening at once. The old one isn't evil, Sheriff. It's just different. So different that our minds can't process it without breaking." "Martinez?" I said to the empty desert. "Is that really you?" "I'm part of something bigger now. Part of the pattern. We're all part of the pattern, Sheriff. Even you. Especially you. What's going to happen? It's already happened. Will happen. Is happening. Time isn't a line, Sheriff. It's a web. And the old one exists in all parts of it simultaneously. The ritual in 2018 failed, but it also succeeded. Both things are true. In some versions of reality, the old one broke through. In others, it didn't. You're just experiencing the version where it didn't. That doesn't make sense. Because you're thinking in 3 dimensions. The old one thinks in 11, maybe more. What you call reality is just a shadow cast by something much more complex. The voice faded with the wind, leaving me alone in the desert with questions that had no answers. I continued as sheriff for 3 more years, balancing my official duties with my unofficial role as guardian against things that shouldn't exist. The dreams never stopped, but I learned to live with them. The connection to the old one remained, a constant pressure in the back of my mind, but I learned to use it, to sense when something was wrong in the desert, when reality was getting thin. In March 2021, I started training Carlos. He'd proven himself during the original incident, had shown he could handle the truth without breaking.
Someone needed to know what I knew, to carry on the watch when I was gone. Because I could feel it. The connection was slowly killing me. Each day I felt a little less human, a little more connected to something vast and alien. Maria had been right. You carry it until you die, and you hope you die before it decides to use you. I retired in September 2021, officially citing health reasons. Carlos took over as sheriff, and I passed on everything I knew, the journal, the contacts in the network, the signs to watch for. He took it all in stride, that good kid from El Paso who'd become a guardian of reality without ever asking for the job. I moved to a small cabin 20 miles from anywhere, where I could feel the desert's moods without the distraction of other people. I spent my days documenting everything I'd learned, creating a record for those who would come after, because they would come. The old one was patient, but it was also persistent. It would try again. December 21st, 2021. Winter solstice. I woke to find symbols carved into the walls of my cabin, the same symbols from the glass circle. But I hadn't carved them. They'd appeared while I slept, as if the cabin itself was trying to tell me something, or warn me. I called Carlos. "It's starting again." "Where?" I looked out my window at the desert, vast and empty and full of secrets. Somewhere out there, people were gathering. Somewhere out there, glass circles were forming. Somewhere out there, the old one was stirring in its sleep, reaching out through dreams and madness to find new servants. "I don't know yet," I told him, "but I'll find out. Because that's what I do now. I'm retired Sheriff Jake Morrison, and I guard the border between our world and theirs, not the border with Mexico. That's just a line on a map. I guard the border between reality and the spaces between spaces, between the world we know and the world that's trying to break through. The desert remembers everything, every ritual, every sacrifice, every attempt to let the old ones through. And now I remember too. I carry that knowledge, that burden, that connection to something that shouldn't exist but does. Some nights, when the moon is dark and the stars are bright, I can feel the old one's attention turn to me. It knows I'm here, knows I'm watching. Sometimes I think it's amused by my efforts to stop it, like a human might be amused by an ant trying to hold back the tide. But I keep watching anyway. Because someone has to. Because the alternative is to let the darkness win. And because, despite everything, I'm still Sheriff Jake Morrison at heart, and protecting people is what I do. Even if what I'm protecting them from is something they'll never know exists. Even if the protection is temporary, just pushing back the inevitable for another few decades or centuries. Even if the cost is my sanity, my health, my humanity slowly eroding like sandstone in the desert wind. The desert never forgets. And neither do I. End recording. Sheriff Jake Morrison died on June 21st, 2023, summer solstice. He was found in his cabin, surrounded by hundreds of pages of notes about things that don't officially exist. His eyes had been replaced with black glass, but unlike the other victims, he appeared to have died peacefully, even smiling. Sheriff Carlos Mendoza continues to serve Presidio County. He reports no unusual activity, but sometimes, on very quiet nights, ranchers report seeing a figure walking the desert, tall, wearing a sheriff's uniform, with eyes that reflect light like black glass. It walks the borders of the county, they say, watching for something. Always watching, always waiting, because the desert never forgets. And some guardians never really die.